And I want to pick up where we had left off. And of course, we left off with the Newburgh Conspiracy and George Washington being able to get his men turned around and not actually launch the coup that they had planned on launching against Congress. But this brings up all kinds of questions then about what the nature of government was like immediately after the Revolution. And I know that with my wife, we talked about the Northwest Ordinance, and I want to talk about that for just a little bit as well, coming up here in a moment. So what we have starting in 1776 and really lasting until 1788 was what we might call Constitution 1.0 instead of our Constitution, the Constitution of 1787. And we call this, and they don't actually, and there's some weird dates in there. The articles are not officially drafted. They're drafted in 1776. They're not adopted by Congress until 1777. And then the states don't ratify them until 1781. So I don't know if you need to know all those dates, but keep at least this date in mind, that basically overall from 1776 to 1788 were ruled under what were called the Articles of Confederation. So our very first Constitution. I do want you guys to know who wrote them. They were written by one of the most famous men of his day, and sadly we've almost completely forgotten about him in our pantheon of heroes, but a guy by the name of John Dickinson. And Dickinson he's a great guy. He's one of these guys who's always a little bit controversial because he voted against the Declaration of Independence. He was the only member of Congress to vote against it. But the reason he voted against it had nothing to do with his belief on independence. He believed we had to have a government in place before we declared independence. That is, we couldn't have moments of anarchy where we're just under no government at all. So his argument's a legitimate argument. It's not some kind of loyalist argument or pro-Britain argument. It's quite the opposite. He just wants us to have our ducks in a row before we actually end our government and start a new one. He wants that prepared. So from his perspective, we should have adopted a new form of government and then eradicated the old form of government rather than the other way around. Dickinson's also, I love him for a lot of reasons. He's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and we'll talk a little bit more about him probably on Friday. But he has this moment, just great moment, where he tells, and he's one of the main architects of the Constitution. So not only does he write the Articles of Confederation, but he'll be one of the great persons at the Constitutional Convention. But he makes this statement in the middle of one of the most difficult debates at the founding. In fact, I'll probably talk about it today a little bit more. But at the founding itself, in the Constitutional Convention, he stops the debate and he tells the men, he says, look, everybody in this room, don't in any way think in abstract principles. Right? We have all of history behind us. And therefore, if there's something you want to propose for the Constitution, propose it from the evidence of history, not just from your own imagination. And so he says very famously, experience must be our only guide, for reason may deceive us. And it's a great moment at the convention, because everybody, there's Hamilton who's got, there's Madison who's got all of these great ideas, but they've never been tried before in history. And Dickinson just throws the gauntlet down and says, look, history's our laboratory. We have the experience of almost anything in history. So either find it in history or forget it. We're not going to implement it in the Constitution. So that's a really powerful moment. But the other thing I love about Dickinson, as one of the founders, and I always contrast him with Jefferson. I mean, I love Jefferson too, but there's Jefferson, you guys may know, I think did a really terrible thing. He's governor of Virginia in 1780, and as soon as British troops enter Virginia, he flees into the mountains. And I've always thought, oh, Thomas,
not the right response. And then you get someone like Dickinson, and Dickinson is from Delaware and New Jersey, and he's a Quaker. So by his religion, he cannot fight at all. And the moment the British show up in Delaware, there's Dickinson on the front lines with his musket fighting the British. So I always loved that idea that, and I'm not trying to knock Jefferson, but that was not Jefferson's finest moment, and it was Dickinson's greatest moment. So I love that. But just keep that in mind. So Dickinson is the architect behind the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation then created what we would see as just a straightforward republic. They were not creating a nation in any way. The 13 states still retained almost absolute power over everything. And so if any state ever vetoed something by the government, it was done. So you had the only way you could pass serious laws under the Articles of Confederation was if all 13 states agreed. So they were seen as incredibly ineffective because you have states like Rhode Island, this tiny little state, which always voted against everything. And so they knew that was going to be a problem. But the articles are really interesting too, because think about this, and this is what I want to say. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard the expression, if you give 3 cheers for something, right, it's excellent. If you give 2 cheers for something, it's basically saying it was a really good go. You didn't do it, but it was a really good go. So I give 2 cheers to the Articles of Confederation. Not 3, but I give 2. I'll give 3 to the Constitution, but 2 to the Articles of Confederation. And think about this, what we were able to do with the Articles of Confederation. We stayed together as a people. So for that whole time period, 1776, 1787, we're a cohesive people. That's incredible. But think about what else happened in this time period. We defeated Great Britain. So we defeated the largest empire the world had ever seen under the Articles of Confederation. Now, we got pretty lucky. There's no question about that. And I would argue that God intervened a couple of times. I say that as Brad, not as a professional historian, but that's my sense. As Brad, that's my sense of what's going on. But it is really amazing that we were able to defeat the largest empire in the world with just 13 little republics. That's astounding. That's like the Greek victory at Thermopylae, right, where 300 Spartans are outnumbered by 100,000 Persians, and in the end they lose, but it's a Pyrrhic victory for the Persians as well. So, but the other thing I would say, 3 things I would say for my 2 cheers for the Articles of Confederation. Number 1, they kept the country together. That's incredible. Number 2, they defeated the world's greatest empire. Even more incredible that they were able to do that. And number 3, and this is what my wife talked with you guys about, they passed what I would argue was the single finest piece of legislation ever passed in America's history. They passed the Northwest Ordinance. And that's also just incredible. So that's the word I'm going to use for all of this. It's incredible that they were able to do this. So I think a lot of times when we teach history, we kind of make fun of the Articles of Confederation because they did have weaknesses, and we know that the Constitution is a billion times superior to the Articles. But I don't think that's fair to the Articles. I think the Articles did their job. I think they did the job very well, and they did things that were just basically miraculous that we were able to get through them. So I don't want to dismiss them. I think that it was a great try, a really great try. Not excellent, but a really great try that kept us together and long enough to get our Constitution overall. Let me note one last thing about the Articles, because you guys may have to deal with this in your life at some point. I probably won't. I won't live to see it, but you guys might. Okay, and that's this. in the Articles of Confederation, it says that Canada may join us as free and equal peoples at any time without a vote. That is, anytime the Canadians decide, they automatically become part of America. That's in the Articles of Confederation. Well, this is an interesting thing about the Articles, and I want you guys, again, something I want you to know and know well. We have in American history what are called four organic meaning common, right? The idea of common law. We have what are called four organic laws in America. And this, if you go to the Supreme Court and you argue before the Supreme Court, you can argue from the four organic laws. And what they are the four laws of the founding of the country that basically combine to give us a complete constitution rather than just the constitution we have on paper. And so the first of the four organic laws is the Declaration of Independence. The second is the Articles of Confederation. The third is the Northwest Ordinance. And the fourth is the U.S. Constitution. And so notice what we do here. The argument is you really can't understand the U.S. Constitution without understanding the three laws that came before it. So those are the four organic laws. And it means that they all bleed into one another. So think about this, and this is long before you guys were born, but it was a big question when I was in grad school. And that question was, at the time, Canada was falling apart. And it was falling apart because Quebec, the French-speaking part of Canada, wanted to secede. This was about 1995, 1996. Quebec was on the verge of seceding from the rest of Canada. And it became a constitutional question. If the rest of Canada joined the United States, would they still be under the Articles of Confederation? Well, the Articles of Confederation are done. They're not our government anymore. But notice in the U.S. Constitution, there is no provision whatsoever that overturns that aspect of the Articles of Confederation. So by the argument, and I'm not saying it'll happen this way, but it could constitutionally, by the argument, because the Constitution never overturned the Articles of Confederation specifically on this point, it may be that what the article said is perfectly legal, and that Canada could at any moment join us without us having even a vote about it. So you could imagine Manitoba or Saskatchewan just saying, we're now a part of the United States. I don't know what would happen constitutionally. There would obviously be pushback against it, and people would try and manipulate the argument. But from my reading of history, and I could be wrong, but from my reading of history, I think Canada still has every right to join us at any point that it wants to. So that, because of the way the four organic laws work. And that's also, and I hope you guys caught this, I don't know if my wife talked about this much, but that's also one reason the Northwest Ordinance is so important. The Northwest Ordinance defines what's happening on the frontier. And therefore, we can't understand the intent of the Constitution without looking at the Northwest Ordinance. And remember what Article 6 of the Northwest Ordinance said. It said, there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said territory. And that's how Abraham Lincoln read the Constitution. He read the Constitution this way, that there can be no slavery in the territories. Lincoln has no right to take it out of South Carolina. He doesn't have the constitutional authority to do that. But he can darn well prevent it from showing up in South Dakota, right? So that's the argument. And the reason is because he's got the Northwest. And notice the Northwest Ordinance, 1787, is just a piece of legislation. But it's such a powerful piece of legislation. It was voted on unanimously. 13 states agreed to it, that it takes on constitutional weight in a way that other pieces of legislation never do. And I was actually kind of jealous that my wife was the one who got to lecture to you guys about the Northwest Ordinance. I love the Northwest Ordinance. I truly, without exaggerating here too much, I don't think it's just the greatest piece of legislation America has ever passed. I think it's one of the greatest pieces of legislation a republic has ever passed. And notice what happens in that Northwest Ordinance, just as a reminder for you guys. And yes, you can imagine this is going to show up on your midterm, definitely, in some way. But think about this with the Northwest Ordinance, right? Article 1, religion doesn't matter. You can be of any religion you want. You can even be an atheist, and you're allowed. You can be a Jew or a Catholic, even a Muslim. Totally acceptable, as long, right, and this really matters, as long as your religion does not hurt someone. You can have whatever religion you want. That's amazing, given all the religious animosity we had in the colonial period. Now we just wipe out all of those distinctions in Article 1 of the Northwest Ordinance. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. Article 2, remember Article 2, the common law shall always be in effect in the said territory. So the common law, right, this law that's 2,000 years old, older than Christianity, this law is our law. And that's why I stressed with you guys, over and over again, when we think about the American founding, we are both deeply radical and deeply conservative at exactly the same time. I mean, what people throws off a government and then establishes that government's law that has existed for 2,000 years, right? That if that's not conservative, nothing is conservative at all. But then, and I don't know if my wife emphasized this, I will with you guys, remember at the end of Article 2, it said no law ought ever be made in the said territory that would interfere with private contracts unless fraud had been detected. Now, just think about what that means. It's going to be critical for us as Americans. If Leon and I want to start a business, doesn't matter that every one of you in this room doesn't like it politically, you don't get a say. If Leon and I make a business that is without fraud, there's nothing you can do about it at all. If Leon and I start a school that you guys don't like, maybe it's a school dedicated to the liberal arts and you think it should be a school dedicated to engineering, you could completely outvote us. It wouldn't matter. You have no say. As long as Leon and I have done it without fraud, we can do whatever we want. I meet my wife. I fall in love with her. She falls in love with me. We get married. It doesn't matter if every one of you disagree with it. We're married. That's what the end of Article 2 says. Whatever a private contract is, it is legitimate. I can start a family, I can start a business, I can start a religion, I can't because I'm Catholic, but if I weren't Catholic, I could start a religion, I can start a school, I can do whatever I want, as long as there's no fraud. And that, I hope you guys realize, that's why Hillsdale's still standing. We're still standing because we argued that under Article 2 of the Northwest Ordinance, there's no fraud here. The government may not like us, but it doesn't matter. Politics doesn't have the right to interfere with us because we're legitimate. All right, that's an amazing, amazing rule. So I want you guys, for me, in this semester, that's just foundational right there, that point. The second part of Article 2 is what, in my mind, it is the best of America. It's what defines us. Because think about this. What do we do as Americans? And I told you guys this on the first day. We create communities. That's what we do. Nobody does it better than we do. We're the best in the world at creating communities. We do it, we understand it, we know what it means, but we do it without crushing the individual. And that's what's incredible, that we have this great mix of what it means to be an individual as well as to be a member of a community. That's very, very powerful. So, this is going to be important because we're going to look for a moment, not today, but sometime before your midterm, we're going to look at the French Revolution. And the French Revolution, in its articles of, well, its Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, Article 3, says no community may ever be formed without the consent of the nation. Exactly the opposite of America in every way. If we put the Northwest Ordinance and we put the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen next to each other, we would have a nuclear explosion. This is matter and antimatter hitting each other. So we are absolutely in no way the French. No way. We are something totally different than what they are, even though we both have a revolution at the same time. So for America, and I think this should be clear from what we've talked about, we always build from the ground up. We never impose from the top down. We do now, but we didn't in the beginning, right? It's always from the ground up. Okay, Article 3 of the Northwest Ordinance. One that I so wish would have happened, but it never did. We shall never, under any circumstances, invade or destroy the rights of Native Americans. In Article 3 of the Northwest Ordinance, we must always treat American Indians as future citizens of the Republic. And therefore, we have no right to harass them or go to war against them. Now, we can all kind of snicker at that because we know that's exactly the opposite of what happened. But let's just imagine you're in the government, you're in Congress, you pass this unanimous law in 1787. That's incredible. These guys had the best intentions in the world. And anybody want to, let's just talk about this for a moment. Anybody want to take a guess? Why do you think we didn't treat the Indians the way we envisioned doing it? Why did it come down to bloodshed and theft on our part? Yeah.
Maybe because they lived in such a different way than
Okay.
our understanding.
Yeah, that's very good. Tell me your name again.
I'm Ollie.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so let's put it this way. You're absolutely right. But here's the part of what we have to get right about the founders to understand. And it's the only way we can explain slavery, and it's the only way we can explain the American Indians and what happens. The Americans truly believe that the settlement of North America will take thousands of years. They think it will take thousands of years. When Thomas Jefferson gives his first inaugural in the spring of 1801, he predicts it will take 1,000 years for American settlement just to reach St. Louis. Do you guys understand what's wrong here? He's off by about 990 years. It took us about 10 years to get to St. Louis and about 14 years to get to Kansas City. No one in the founding period understood how quickly this was going to happen. And what that means, and this, I know I've told you guys already, I've given you that fundamental about American community. I'm giving you a second fundamental today, and that is about American history. When it comes to taking over land, nobody's better at it than the Americans. Man, we are so fast. We can take over a continent in 2 generations. Nobody's ever done anything like that. But when it comes to actually treating that land justly, there's no one worse than Americans. We're terrible at it. So we're very good at capturing land. We're very good at treating it justly. And so every time we expand, we have to ask this question again. Well, what do we do with the Indian? Well, we need the Indian culturally to assimilate to America. It's going to take a long time. If your horizon is several thousand years, it's not a problem. If your horizon is next year, it's a serious, serious problem. And the same thing with slavery. Every time we go west, we open up the debate again. Should this new conquered territory be slave or free? And the whole thing is thrown in our face again. Yeah, whereas we would say, someone like Jefferson actually did believe slavery was on its way out. It's over, but it may take 100 years. Well, if you're dealing with a time frame of next year as opposed to a century from now, you're just not ready. And so as Americans, and again, I'm not trying to knock us, but I just want to be honest about us. We're really good at expanding, but then we're deeply immature as a people. We don't know how to regulate what we've just taken over. So that's a hard thing for us. Yeah.
So you mentioned that they thought that we wouldn't get to St. Louis until like 1,000 years.
That was Jefferson. He
Yeah.
said it would take 1,000
You
years.
also mentioned in a previous class that Jefferson thought that the Union wouldn't last
Yeah.
all that long, and especially not 1,000 years.
Right.
So Jefferson envisioning that the government would be like a completely different government by the time we got to St. Louis?
Yeah, well, Jefferson's vision was this. It's pretty radical. So he did think we would have these constant revolutions that would be happening, and every new generation would be writing its own constitution over and over again. But he also believed that what's now America, and so you think about when he was president, what America was just everything from the Atlantic to the Mississippi. But even if it was just that, not the continent, but just a third of the continent, Jefferson still believed that there would be 5 separate countries within that.
Like eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, he never envisioned that would be one people. He thought we would be 5 republics. We'd be allied to one another, but we'd be 5 separate republics. So, yeah, Jefferson's got a pretty radical vision about what's happening here. Does that answer you?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, it's a great question. Really great. Okay, good, guys. So just keep that in mind. Okay, finally then, Articles 4 and 5 of the Northwest Ordinance. It prevents, and beautifully, does a great job, it prevents any of our new territories from becoming enslaved by the old territories. In other words, if I live in Virginia or I live in Ohio, I have the same rights as an American citizen. That's what the Northwest Ordinance guarantees. If you guys remember your Roman history, wherever the Romans went, they always subjugated the peoples that they conquered. They never made them first-class citizens. They always made them second or third-class citizens. Well, the founders said, we're not going to do that. Everywhere we go, we're going to make first-class citizens. Right? So no, we're not an empire. We're a republic. And then, brilliantly, Article 6, there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said territory. And that was a last-minute addition by, and I would like you guys to know his name, the guy who's well, I'll give you a quick history. So the Northwest Ordinance was originally written by Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson wrote it, but he wrote it for Virginia, because Virginia had laid claim to what's the Northwest Territory. And you guys, when I'm saying Northwest, you know what I mean, right? It's Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and just a little bit of Minnesota. Right? So that we're talking about 5 states now. That's the Northwest Territory. So Thomas Jefferson, when he was governor of Virginia, had written this as a piece of legislation. Then Virginia quietly gave up its claims to the Northwest and gave them over to Congress, to America as a whole. They gave them up. In fact, every state had colonies that they claimed, and they all gave them up except Massachusetts. The one that Massachusetts refused to give up was Maine. Maine was its colony, and that'll be important later in American history. But they're the only ones who didn't give up their claims. Everybody else did. And so then it was a guy who we now remember, especially if you guys go on to law school after this. It's the founder of Harvard Law, a guy by the name of Nathan Dane, just like a Danish person, D-A-N-E. Nathan Dane was his name. And he's the one who took Jefferson's proposal for Virginia and made it for America. But at the last moment, as literally he was turning the piece of legislation in to the House, he wrote Article 6 really quickly, that there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude. But I want you guys, and this is Lincoln's argument, but I buy it. I think Lincoln's right about this. We cannot understand the Constitution without the Northwest Ordinance. And that's why Lincoln and the Republican Party say we have every right in the world to prevent slavery in the Western territories, because that's what the Northwest Ordinance did. I can't get rid of it in South Carolina. I just can't, because South Carolina came in legitimately as a slave power, and I couldn't regulate that. I would like to get rid of it, but I can't. That's Lincoln's argument. And again, I hope you guys realize the whole reason the Republican Party is called the Republican Party is because they're naming themselves after the Northwest Ordinance. How do you create a republic? That's where the Republican Party comes from creating that from the Northwest Ordinance. Okay, so you guys, again, I know I'm probably telling you stuff that my wife did, but I want all of us on the same page. Man, if you want to win me over, start talking poetically about Washington and the Northwest Ordinance. I will be a very happy man. So just keep that in mind. I really do like these things, and I think they're critical for us. Okay, and you all get the concept of the 4 organic laws, why they bleed one into another. Okay, good. You guys have any questions at this point at all? Yeah.
So if we're talking about the Article 3, where we just didn't obey it.
Yeah.
Are Articles 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 still applicable if we just were able to break one of them?
They are. It's a great question. And keep this in mind. I mean, there's good and bad to this. Our laws are only as good as we are. And that's so important. So we can put all kinds of things down on paper that we believe to be true, but if we don't live them out, they're meaningless. So I'll give you an example. Just in the Constitution, right? Let's take the Constitution for a moment. So there was a provision in the Constitution that said that if one slave ran away from one state into another, there was an obligation to return that slave. It's called the Fugitive Slave Law, or clause within the Constitution. Nobody, and thank God, nobody enforced that law at all. It was everybody, it was there in the Constitution. Everybody totally ignored it until 1850. So we went almost 75 years of the Constitution without ever enforcing that law. And then we tried to enforce it, and of course, what's it do? It leads right to a civil war. That's what causes that's the first main cause of the Civil War, is the Fugitive Slave Law. And it was good that we neglected it. It was really good. It was too bad we had it in there in the first place, but it was really good we neglected it. But then think about this, and I think for a place like Hillsdale, we could probably all agree to this. Amendments 9 and 10 to the U.S. Constitution say that any power not delegated to the federal government is reserved either to the people or the states. We have never once in our history enforced that. Never once. The 9th Amendment made it to the Supreme Court once in its history. I think that's really terrible. I'm very glad we never enforced the Fugitive Slave Law until 1850, and I'm sorry we did it then. But I'm really sad we didn't enforce Articles 9 and 10 of the Bill of Rights, because I think it would be a totally different country if we had. But that's where you and I, that's where it matters. The law only is as good as we are. Does that make sense? So, and remember, we're not the French. We don't pass a law and think, oh, everybody better obey it because we said so. Our laws come from the ground up. Our laws are a reflection of us and our dignity. So, yeah, good. Okay, good. Everybody then? Great question. All right, we've just got about 8 minutes left. So let me just tell you about the Constitutional Convention for a bit, and we'll get into the Constitution. Okay, Constitutional Convention. In 1786, there is a group that meets in Annapolis, Maryland, and they're unhappy with the Constitution. And so what they do, that is with the Articles of Confederation, right? They're unhappy with Constitution 1.0. They don't think it's powerful enough. And in large part, there's a movement that's been going on in America called the Continentalist movement. And this is because these are nationalists. These are guys who want to create a serious nation out of America. But remember, as we talked about, nation is a bad word. You cannot say that in the American founding and be taken seriously, because a nation implies everything America's not. So they call themselves continentalist, which is a polite way of saying nation, right? But they can get away with it because it's not quite as loaded as nation is. So a group of these continentalists meet in Annapolis, and they make a call for the following summer for a group of people to meet, all delegates from each of the 13 states, to meet to propose only revisions to the Articles of Confederation, not in any way, shape, or form to write a new constitution, but only to amend the existing constitution. You guys remember, if I amend the Constitution, what kind of a vote do I have to have? Unanimous. I've got to get all 13 states to agree. Who's the problem? Rhode Island. Thank you. Rhode Island is the problem. So, well, they know they're not going to get Rhode Island to change anything at all. Rhode Island's conservative. It's kind of backwater. It's tiny. They're not going to do anything. And so there's no way they're going to get any revisions passed to this thing. But they go ahead and make the call. And the call goes out so that 77 men are elected to spend the summer of 1787 in Philadelphia, to spend that summer in Philadelphia and to talk about revisions to the Constitution. And some of the greatest men ever in American history show up. People like George Washington, the greatest man of our era. Right? George Washington shows up. James Madison, young, just out of Princeton, but already a hot commodity. Everybody loves him. He's going to do great things. John Dickinson, the author of the Articles of Confederation, shows up. George Mason, who's the single largest slaveholder in all of America, shows up. Interestingly enough, and I want you guys to keep this in mind, he's also the most adamantly anti-slavery man in America. So it's kind of wild to put that into context. People like Luther Martin, not Martin Luther, but Luther Martin show up. And Luther Martin is drunk almost the whole summer. So he's not going to count for much, but he shows up and he adds color to all of this. Ben Franklin is there. Right? So we're really, the only two great men who are not a part of it are Thomas Jefferson, because he's off in France doing his Republican duty. He's a diplomat. And John Adams, who's off in England, being our diplomat to England. So they're both, and it's too bad, because Adams especially would have been fantastic at the Constitutional Convention, but he's not there. Okay, so how many of you in this room, I just want to see a show of hands, have actually been to Independence Hall and seen the room where they write it? Okay, just a couple of you. You guys remember, and this is for everybody else. Okay, 77 guys are elected. Only 56 ever show up. That's all, 56. That room is about the size of this room. It's not much bigger. And they don't want any reporters listening. So they put absolutely huge velvet drapes over the windows. And they are there from May through September. It is the hottest summer in Philadelphia in recorded history. It is humid. They're all in their three-piece because that was the moment. They did not have Old Spice. They didn't have deodorant. You got 56 guys in a sweaty room for 3.5 months. And they're all, we have in this room right now, we've got about 26 people. Double that, and then add a few more. That's how crowded it was. Right, so we're literally standing next to each other all summer. You could imagine tempers would flare in all of that. The smell must have been atrocious in all of that. I mean, that's an amazing thing. So I want you guys physically to put yourselves there for a moment and to imagine. And I will freely admit, I hate any humidity. Humidity just drives me. I would live in this 365 days a year rather than ever endure humidity. I hate it. Just feels like 1,000 people touching me at once. So that, you imagine that in what's going on in Philadelphia. So what do they decide right away? So they decide a couple of things, and we're going to end with this here in just a moment, guys. So what do they decide? Number one, this is to be a completely secret meeting. It's number one. Nobody is to have any information about this meeting outside of the participants themselves. Now, we know that almost everybody violates this, because one of the persons who's elected to this, who doesn't come, is Charles Carroll of Carrollton. You guys remember him? Only Catholic signer of the Declaration. But he's sending notes constantly, and the reason we have the U.S. Senate is because Carroll designed it. So even though he's not there, he's the architect of the U.S. Senate and what happens. Or Thomas Jefferson. He is kept apprised the entire time of everything that's going on, and he sends recommendations in, all in violation of the rules, but they're doing this nonetheless. Number two, they say there is no possibility of revising the Articles. We are here to destroy the Articles. So we're going to write something brand new, absolutely brand new, something that will replace the Articles completely. And who's not there? Rhode Island never sends a delegate, right? So this is going to be hard, because you've still got to get unanimous by the old rules, right? So they're going to have to get around that. Finally, number three, and this is our final point today, guys. Point number three, the greatest enemy of the Republic is democracy. There is no greater element and danger to this Republic than democracy. Democracy has to be combated at every level. All right, you guys got that? Cool. All right, thanks, guys. That was fun for me. Hope it was for you too. I will see you then. No new readings, just have read the Constitution. We're going to go through them and a couple of other things, but I'll see you guys Friday. So do look for an email from me in terms of talking about what the midterm's going to look like. So sometime in the next 5 days. Thanks, everybody.